Welcome, friend, to another journey together. We are so glad to have you here. Tonight, you will discover old teachings that show the biggest secret of a free mind. How to clear your mind, not by force or fighting, but through understanding the deep wisdom that Zen masters have used for thousands of years. If you like, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I am going to share carefully chosen stories that unlock one of Buddhism's most important lessons: that an empty mind isn't a blank mind, but the most natural, peaceful state of awareness possible. Each tale contains powerful lessons that can completely change your relationship with racing thoughts, mental stress, and the tiring effort to control your inner feelings. These aren't ordinary stories about relaxing. They are old teachings from masters who found something incredible about how the mind works. That the mental quiet you are looking for isn't reached by stopping thoughts, but by seeing the huge open awareness where all thoughts naturally come and go. As we go through these amazing teachings together, you will notice something special begin to happen. The constant mental noise that usually fills your head will start to naturally get quiet. The struggle to control your thoughts will begin to melt away. You will find the deep rest that comes when you stop fighting your mind and start understanding how it really works. So settle in completely now. Let your body sink into your bed or chair. Take one deep breath with me. And as you breathe out, get ready to receive timeless wisdom about clearing your mind that has been waiting centuries for you to find it. Let us now explore a story about the easy nature of true emptiness. In a peaceful fishing village by a twisting river, Master Bang sat quietly thinking beneath the shade of an old willow tree. The morning sun cast dancing patterns through the leaves as fishermen cast their nets into the clear water. The sound of gentle waves hitting the shore created a natural beat that seemed to slow time itself. An old fisherman walked up to the master, his face looking very frustrated. "Master," he said, bowing politely, "my mind bothers me like a slippery eel. The harder I try to catch my thoughts and make them still, the more they slip through my fingers. I struggle day and night to clear this restless mind. But the more I try, the more upset I become. Please show me the way to true emptiness." Bang looked at the man with kind understanding, then noticed a hollow gourd floating peacefully on the water's surface. With a gentle hand, he pointed to the simple shell bobbing easily in the current. "Tell me, friend," he said softly, "what big effort does this gourd make to be empty? What huge struggle does it go through to hold nothing but air and space?" The fisherman followed the master's look and watched the gourd drift silently with the flow of the river. After a long moment, he replied, "It makes no effort at all, master. It simply is empty." "The gourd doesn't fight to be empty. It naturally holds space inside its walls." Bankai smiled, his eyes twinkling with gentle wisdom. "Then tell me, why do you work so hard to become what you already are? Why do you struggle to achieve what is your natural way?" The fisherman stared at the floating gourd, and something changed in his understanding. The very effort to force emptiness was what filled his mind with struggle. In that moment of realizing this, his restless searching got quiet, and he felt the natural space that had always been there underneath his mental grabbing. The Buddha once said, "You are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement." This ancient wisdom shows the puzzle at the heart of spiritual practice. We tire ourselves out trying to reach a state of emptiness that is already our natural way, like the gourd that doesn't struggle to be hollow. Why do we make such a huge effort to become empty when emptiness is our original condition? Zen. Buddhism points to our deep habit of doing things rather than just being. We have been taught to believe that all important change requires effort, struggle, and achievement. This works well for outside goals, but when used for inner change, it often creates the very problems we are trying to fix. The mind that tries to empty itself is like someone digging a hole to find space. The act of digging creates more dirt, more mess, more complexity. Each thought about reaching emptiness adds another layer of mental activity. Each effort to stop thinking makes more thoughts about the process of stopping thoughts. Think about how this pattern happens in your daily meditation practice. You sit down with the goal to quiet your mind, but then notice how active your thoughts are. This noticing creates a voice in your head. I am thinking too much. I should be calmer by now. Why is this so hard? Each of these thoughts is like trying to smooth water with your hand. The action creates more ripples. Zen master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This points to the truth that wisdom isn't something we get through effort, but something we recognize as already here. The gourd doesn't become empty. It shows its true nature when we look clearly at what it actually is. The fisherman's eel-like thoughts represent our usual relationship with our mind. We chase after thoughts to catch them, hold them, look at them, or push them away. But thoughts like eels become harder to catch the more we grab at them. When we stop chasing and simply watch, we find that thoughts come and go naturally in the space of awareness, like waves appearing and disappearing in the ocean. This doesn't mean we become lazy or stop engaging with life. The gourd is empty, yet it does its job perfectly, carrying water when needed and floating freely when not. Our natural emptiness allows us to respond correctly to each moment without the heavy weight of endless mental fighting. In Zen practice, we learn to tell the difference between the space of awareness and the things that happen inside it. Thoughts, emotions, and feelings are like clouds passing through the big sky of your mind. The sky doesn't try to push clouds away or struggle to stay clear. It simply provides the open space in which all weather can come and go. Tonight, as you notice the familiar pattern of trying to control or improve your mental state, remember the floating gourd. Can you rest in the knowing that your true nature is already the big awareness you are looking for? Can you allow thoughts to come and go like ripples on water without adding the extra layer of effort to make them different? As the Buddha taught, nothing can harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded. But once mastered, nothing can help you as much as your own thoughts. The mastery he speaks of isn't control through force, but recognizing the natural emptiness in which all thoughts appear and disappear. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about expressing yourself without words. At a lively village festival filled with colourful lanterns and the smell of incense, Master Hakuin walked among the celebration when the steady beating of drums caught his attention. Following the sound, he found a drummer whose playing was so amazing that crowds had gathered in silent shock, their faces lit with wonder. The drummer moved with smooth grace, his body swaying in perfect harmony with each beat. His face showed pure joy and focus, completely lost in the music flowing through him. What made this scene even more amazing was that the drummer had been born without the ability to speak. He lived in a world of silence, yet created the most beautiful rhythm anyone had ever heard. A curious student walked up to Hakuin, confused by what he saw. "Master, how can someone who cannot make words create such perfect music? How does someone locked in silence make sounds that speak to everyone's heart?" Hakuin watched the drummer for several moments, noticing the man's complete presence and the way he seemed to disappear entirely into the rhythm. During a break in the show, the master walked up to the drummer with gentle motions, asking through signs why his drumming touched people so deeply. The drummer's eyes lit up with understanding. He smiled and pointed first to his throat, showing his inability to speak. Then he touched his head and made a sweeping motion, as if clearing something away. Finally, he picked up his drumsticks and began to play on an imaginary drum, making no real sound, yet moving with such exactness and grace that the watching crowd could almost hear the silent rhythm beating through the air. "You see," Hakuin told his student, his voice filled with thanks, "this man cannot fill his mind with the constant noise of words. So his body speaks the deeper language that exists before thoughts form. He empties himself so completely into the drum that there is no drummer left, only pure drumming, No separation between player and played, between silence and sound. The student watched with new eyes as the drummer started playing again, noticing how the man's eyes stayed closed and his face showed complete peace, as if he had dissolved entirely into the rhythm itself, becoming one with the music that flowed through him. Buddha's wisdom reminds us silence is not silent. Silence speaks. It speaks most beautifully. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding how emptiness allows the most real expression. The mute drummer's limit becomes his greatest strength, showing how the absence of one form of communication opens space for a deeper, more universal language. Why do we often struggle to express our deepest truths? Buddhist psychology explains that our constant internal talking creates static with real expression. Like radio noise that drowns out a clear signal, our mental commentary, self-worry, and need to find the right words often block the natural flow of creativity and real communication. The drummer's silence isn't a limit. It is a doorway to pure expression. Without the option of spoken explanation or the habit of practicing in his head, he must communicate directly from the source of his being. His body becomes a clear channel for rhythm, unfiltered by the mind's habit to analyze, judge, or change the creative impulse. Think about how this applies to your own moments of creative expression. Whether you are speaking to a loved one, writing, painting, or simply moving through your day, notice how often you are doing the activity and commenting on it internally at the same time. Am I saying this right? How do I look? Will they understand? Is this good enough? These mental voices create a layer of separation between you and the experience. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi spoke of beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh openness rather than ideas you already have about how things should happen. The drummer shows this perfectly. Each beat comes out fresh from silence, colored by no previous thoughts about what the rhythm should be or worries about how it will be received. This points to a deep teaching about the relationship between emptiness and fullness. The drummer's mind, empty of word chatter, becomes full of rhythm. His silence creates space for the most beautiful communication. In Zen art, this rule appears everywhere. The empty space in a painting that gives life to the brush strokes. The pause in conversation that allows deeper understanding. The silence between musical notes that creates melody. In our world full of media, we often think communication means constant output, more words, more information, more explanation. But the drummer reveals the power of what the Japanese call ma, the meaningful pause, the meaningful emptiness that allows real expression to come out. This isn't about becoming literally mute, but about finding moments of inner silence that allow our deeper truth to surface. When we stop filling every moment with mental noise, space opens for feelings, creativity, and real responses to come up naturally. Tonight, as you talk or do something creative, can you try small moments of inner silence? Can you allow answers to come from stillness rather than from the habit of rushing to fill space with words or actions? Maybe you will find that your most real expression comes not from thinking about what to say, but from the empty space where thinking stops. As the Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. The drummer's soundless rhythm reminds us that the deepest communication often comes from the deepest silence. Let us now turn to a story about the hidden wisdom in repeating actions. In a remote mountain monastery, where morning mist clung to old pine trees, there lived a monk whose only job was sweeping the stone courtyard. For 30 years, visitors had watched him follow the same careful pattern. Beginning at dawn, he would sweep each stone, each corner, each pathway with the exact same care and attention. The monk moved with slow grace, his worn wooden broom creating soft whispers against the stones. Whether autumn leaves covered the ground or spring petals danced in the breeze, he approached each day's sweeping with the same peaceful focus, as if doing the task for the first time. One morning, a scholar famous for his book learning, arrived at the monastery. He had studied in great universities and libraries, gathering huge knowledge about Buddhist texts and theories. As he watched the aging monk carefully sweeping, a look of thinking he was better crossed his face. "Old man," the scholar called out with obvious scorn, "after 30 years of sweeping the same courtyard, surely you know where the dirt piles up. Why do you waste time sweeping areas that are already clean? Haven't you learned anything from all this repetition?" The monk paused in his sweeping, leaning gently on his broom handle. His weathered face remained calm as he looked at the young scholar with eyes that held decades of quiet understanding. "Young friend," he replied softly, "after 30 years, I have discovered that there is no dirt to sweep, no broom to hold, and no one here to do the sweeping. Yet somehow, mysteriously, the courtyard remains perfectly clean." Without any trace of pride or defensiveness, he started sweeping again. The scholar noticed that despite the monk's confusing words, not a single fallen leaf remained out of place, and the stones shined with a soft glow that spoke of years of loving attention. As the Buddha observed, "If you want to know your mind, sit in meditation. If you want to tame your mind, get up and work." What comes from this story is the deep teaching that true emptiness isn't found by stopping activity, but by engaging so completely that the sense of a separate doer melts away. Why do we often view repeated tasks as meaningless, boring work? Modern culture has trained us to value new things, achievement, and measurable progress above all else. We dismiss routine activities as beneath our intelligence, seeing them as obstacles to more important goals. This view misses the changing power hidden within simple, repeated actions. The scholar represents our mind that constantly seeks to improve, fix, and move beyond where we are now. This mind asks, "What is the point? How can I make this faster? When will I be done with this level and move to something more important?" But this very attitude prevents us from finding the depth available in each moment of doing. Zen Buddhism teaches that wisdom isn't found by rising above ordinary activities, but by entering them so completely that the lines between self and action melt away. The sweeping monk shows what the Japanese call shoshin, beginner's mind, approaching the same task with fresh awareness rather than robot-like habit. Think about your own relationship with routine activities. When you wash dishes, do laundry, or travel to work, where is your attention? Often, we are physically present, but mentally elsewhere, treating these moments as time to get through rather than chances for presence. We sweep our floors while thinking about weekend plans, wash dishes while practicing tomorrow's meetings. The monk's wisdom reveals that when we bring complete attention to any activity, something amazing happens. The sense of being a separate person doing a task begins to fade, replaced by a flowing mix of awareness and action. This isn't just an idea, it is a lived experience available in any moment of total focus. Master Dogen taught, "When you walk, just walk. When you sit, just sit. Don't wobble." This instruction points to the deep simpleness of waking up. We don't need special situations or fancy practices. The monastery courtyard becomes a perfect temple when approached with complete presence. The scholar's question reveals our culture's obsession with productivity and learning in terms of gathering information or skills. But the monk shows a different kind of learning. The slow melting of the trick that there is someone separate from the activity doing it. After 30 years, the sweeping has swept away the sweeper. This doesn't mean the monk has become lazy or asleep. Notice that the courtyard remains perfectly clean, suggesting exactness and care beyond what mere robot-like effort could achieve. When the sense of hard doing relaxes, action becomes more effective, not less. In Zen monasteries, work practice is considered as valuable as formal meditation. Sweeping, cooking, gardening, all become chances to melt the fake line between spiritual practice and daily life. The monk's broom becomes his meditation cushion, each stroke a moment of complete presence. Tonight, as you do some simple routine activity, perhaps brushing your teeth, preparing food, or cleaning your space, can you try with complete presence? Can you release the mind's habit to be elsewhere and discover what happens when you fully inhabit the task at hand? You might find that in moments of total focus, the questioner and the question disappear, leaving only the pure activity itself. As the Buddha taught, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The monk's 30 years of sweeping light, countless moments of presence, each stroke a candle lighting up the ordinary magic of complete attention. Now let us explore a Zen story about learning from silence itself. High in the misty mountains where old peaks touch the sky, a restless student made the hard climb to find the hermit master, Tokusan. He had heard stories of the master's deep wisdom and traveled for days through dangerous paths, driven by an urgent hunger for teaching and understanding. The student's mind raced with excitement as he walked rocky trails and steep slopes. He had prepared countless questions about meditation, enlightenment, and the nature of reality. His backpack was heavy with Buddhist books he hoped to discuss, and his heart was full of expectations about the deep teachings he would receive. After hours of searching through bamboo groves and along narrow ridges, he finally found the master sitting in perfect stillness, facing a blank rock wall. Tokusan sat so still that he seemed to have become part of the mountain itself, his presence both utterly ordinary and mysteriously deep. "Master," the student called out, breathing heavily from his climb and bowing politely. "I have traveled far and endured great hardship to learn from you. Please teach me the secret of emptying my mind. I am ready to receive your wisdom." Tokusan didn't turn around. He continued facing the plain rock wall as if the student hadn't spoken. Hours passed. The morning mist lifted, revealing the huge mountain landscape. But still the master remained motionless, staring at the unremarkable stone surface. The student's first patience slowly turned into confusion, then frustration, then annoyance. He had expected talks about deep thinking matters, not this seemingly endless silence. "Master," he finally burst out, his voice echoing off the rock walls. "I have been waiting for hours. Please, I am here to learn. When will you begin teaching me?" Still facing the wall, Tokusan spoke quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "This rock has been teaching you for hours. Why haven't you been listening? Every moment it has been offering you exactly what you came here to find." The student stared at the rock in confusion, his mind spinning with questions. "But master, rocks can't speak. How can a stone wall teach anything? It just sits there doing nothing." "Exactly," replied Tokusan, still not turning around. "When you can hear what this rock has been saying all morning, you will understand what an empty mind sounds like. When you can receive its teaching, you will know what you came here to learn." Buddha spoke of this when he said, "If you want to know your mind, sit in meditation. If you want to know the world's mind, listen to silence." This tale shows the deep teaching that the greatest wisdom often comes not from words or explanations, but from directly meeting stillness itself. Why do we struggle to learn from silence when it offers the most direct teaching available? Our school training has taught us to think learning means getting information, explanations, and spoken instruction. We expect teachers to fill our minds with ideas, tricks, and answers. But Zen points to a different kind of learning, one that happens through direct experience rather than gathering facts. The student's restless searching represents our usual approach to spiritual growth. We travel great distances both literally and in our minds, looking for someone to give us what we imagine we lack. We collect teachings, attend classes, read books, hoping to find the final piece of information that will unlock understanding. But this very searching often prevents us from seeing what is already here. The rock wall shows what Zen calls original nature, the basic awareness that exists before thoughts, ideas, and searching happen. It simply is, without a plan, without trying to be anything other than what it is. It doesn't try to be wise or enlightened. It doesn't seek to improve itself or achieve special states. This effortless being is exactly what the student came to learn, yet he cannot recognize it because it doesn't match what he expected. Master Bankai taught, "You are all perfectly unborn Buddhas, simply stop doubting." The rock shows this unborn nature perfectly. It has never not been exactly what it is. It doesn't wonder if it is enlightened enough or worry about its spiritual progress. This natural state of being before the mind complicates it with searching and unhappiness is what Zen practice points toward. Think about how often you seek teachings or experiences to fix your mind or reach special states of consciousness. Notice the belief that wisdom must come from outside yourself through special practices or unusual experiences. The rock wall suggests that what you are looking for is actually the natural state of awareness itself, the simple presence that exists right now reading these words. The student's inability to hear the rock reveals how our thinking mind filters experience. We divide reality into categories: meaningful and meaningless, spiritual and ordinary, teaching and non-teaching. But the rock offers the most basic teaching: how to simply be present without a plan, without the need to be anywhere else or achieve anything different. In Zen temples, students often sit facing blank walls for hours or even years. This practice, called shikantaza, or just sitting, isn't about reaching any special state, but about learning to rest in awareness itself. The wall becomes a mirror, reflecting back the student's own restless searching and slowly revealing the peace that exists when searching stops. Dogen Zenji said to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. The rock wall teaches this forgetting, not through explanation, but through its own example of existence without self-worry or spiritual goals. Tonight, as your mind fills with thoughts about tomorrow's jobs or ongoing worries, can you remember the teaching of the silent rock? Can you find a moment to simply be present without trying to achieve, improve, or understand anything? Maybe you will find that the peace you seek isn't hidden in complex teachings, but available in the simple recognition of awareness itself. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The rock wall points us home to this inner silence, not as an achievement, but as our most natural state, always present beneath the mind's constant searching. Our next story is about catching the spirit of what cannot be held. In a peaceful monastery garden where morning light filtered through delicate bamboo leaves, Master Sichu sat peacefully with a brush in hand, painting with the focused attention of decades of practice. His movements were smooth and exact, each stroke coming from deep stillness and returning to quiet. A young artist who had heard of the master's famous paintings walked up with eager excitement. He had traveled from the busy city carrying his own brushes and paints, hoping to learn the tricks that made Sichu's work so deep. The young man had studied with many teachers, mastering various styles and methods, yet something important remained missing in his own art. "Master," the young artist said, bowing respectfully as he watched Sichu's brush dance across the rice paper. "Your paintings capture the very feeling of emptiness itself. They breathe with life while holding nothing solid. What is your secret? What technique allows you to paint with such spiritual depth?" Sichu continued painting without looking up, his brush moving with the natural rhythm of breathing. The bamboo taking shape on the paper seemed to sway with invisible wind, its leaves appearing to whisper ancient secrets. "I paint only what isn't there," he replied quietly, his voice carrying the same gentle authority as his brushstrokes. The young artist leaned closer, studying the forming painting with confused focus. "I don't understand, Master. You are clearly painting bamboo. I can see the stalks, the leaves, the delicate joints. How can you say you are painting what isn't there?" Sichu lifted his brush from the paper and held the painting up to catch the morning light. The bamboo appeared complete, yet somehow the empty spaces between the stalks seemed more alive and present than the painted parts themselves. The white areas of unpainted paper weren't merely background. they pulsed with energy and movement, creating the very feeling of the bamboo grove. Most painters, Sichu explained with gentle patience, fill the emptiness with bamboo. They focus on adding more detail, more color, more defined shape. But I use bamboo to paint the emptiness. The bamboo, you see, is just an excuse for the space to reveal itself. The true subject of the painting is what exists between the brush strokes. He handed the brush to the young artist, his eyes twinkling with warm encouragement. Now you try, but remember, don't paint the bamboo. Let the bamboo paint the nothing. Allow the emptiness to use your brush to make itself seen. The young artist took the brush with shaking hands, suddenly understanding that he had been approaching art, and perhaps life itself, from entirely the wrong direction. The Buddha understood that shape is emptiness, and emptiness is shape. This ancient wisdom shows us that true art, like true living, comes not from adding more, but from showing what was always present. The master painter doesn't create beauty. He uncovers it by removing everything that hides its natural expression. Why do we habitually try to fill emptiness rather than honor it? Our culture trains us to equate value with gathering, meaning with complexity, and success with addition. We believe that the more we add, more details, more explanations, more achievements, more things, the more complete and happy we will become. But Sichu's painting reveals the opposite. True skill often lies in knowing what to leave out. The young artist represents our common approach to creativity and life. We focus on the shapes, the tricks, the methods, the content, while missing the spaces that give those forms meaning. In music, the silence between notes creates rhythm. In building, the empty space inside walls creates rooms. In relationships, the comfortable silences create closeness. Yet, we usually attend to the notes, the walls, and the words while ignoring the essential emptiness that makes them meaningful. This rule extends far beyond art. Think about how you approach problem solving. Do you try to add more analysis, more options, more considerations? Or can you sometimes find solutions by removing complications, simplifying your approach, and creating space for clarity to come up naturally? Zen writing masters speak of one mind, one brush, one stroke. This doesn't mean painting carelessly, but rather allowing each mark to come from the same source of emptiness that Sichu describes. When the painter's ego mind steps aside, the brush moves with natural ease, guided by a wisdom deeper than technique. The master's instruction to let the bamboo paint the nothing points to a deep shift in creative thinking. Instead of you painting the bamboo, you become a clear channel through which the true nature of bamboo expresses itself. This requires letting go of ideas you already have about what the painting should look like, and trusting the natural intelligence that flows through empty awareness. Master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." Most artists become so focused on their mental ideas of bamboo that they miss the living essence standing before them. Sichu suggests painting from direct sight rather than gathered ideas. This teaching applies to every aspect of life. In conversation, can you listen to the silence between words where understanding actually lives? In decision-making, can you access the space between thoughts where wisdom naturally comes up? In relationships, can you appreciate the emptiness that allows love to flow rather than trying to fill every moment with activity or explanation? The Japanese art rule of ma, meaningful emptiness, appears throughout their art forms. The pause in poetry that allows deeper meaning to echo. The empty corner in a room that creates a feeling of space. The single flower arrangement that honors the beauty of simplicity over too much. Tonight, as you do any creative activity, whether cooking, writing, arranging your living space, or simply having a conversation, can you try Sichu's approach? Can you focus less on what you are adding and more on the space you are creating? Maybe you will find that your most real expression comes not from filling emptiness, but from allowing emptiness to fill you. As the Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. The master painter shows us that letting go of techniques, expectations, and the need to fill every space opens the door to expressions of beauty that no amount of addition could achieve. Let us now turn to a tale about the wisdom that can be found in unexpected moments of supposed rule-breaking. This is the fish bones in the peaceful grounds of a mountain monastery where the morning mist clung to old pine trees and the sound of temple bells marked the rhythm of quiet life. A day worker was going about his routine fix-it work. As he swept beneath the raised wooden floors of the main meditation hall, something unusual caught his eye. Fresh bones from what appeared to be a sea bream, still shining with traces of the previous night's meal. The worker's heart raced with the meaning of his find. Fish was strictly forbidden in the monastery. The rules were clear about avoiding meat, and these bones represented a serious break of the group's most basic food rules. This was a scandal worthy of immediate attention from the highest boss. Holding the proof in his weathered hands, the worker hurried across the temple grounds to find the master. "Master! Master!" he called out, his voice carrying both excitement and moral anger. "Look what I found under the monk's hall. Fresh fish bones. How embarrassing to have such proof of rule-breaking turn up here at the temple. What will people think of our group's discipline?" The master, who had been quietly tending to his morning tea, looked up with eyes that held no surprise, no shock, no disappointment. Instead, a gentle smile played across his weathered face as he looked at the bones the worker presented with such righteous concern. "Well, well," the master said, laughing softly as he turned the bones over in his palm. "The students nowadays have certainly gotten soft. Back when I was a student, we never left over even the bones." The worker stood frozen, his mouth open, unsure whether he had heard correctly. Had the master just confessed to not only knowing about the fish eating, but to having once eaten fish so thoroughly that no evidence remained? The moral certainty that had driven him to report this break crumbled in an instant. Buddha's wisdom tells us, the fault of others is easily seen, but that of oneself is difficult to see. This teaching relates deeply to our human habit to focus on the perceived failures of others while staying blind to our own imperfections and the complexity of any situation. This ancient wisdom shows how quickly we become drunk on moral superiority. The worker's excitement at finding proof of wrongdoing reveals a troubling aspect of human nature, our eagerness to find fault in others, especially when we see them as having higher standards or more spiritual power than ourselves. Why do we get such satisfaction from finding the imperfections of those we consider our moral or spiritual betters? This impulse often stems from what Zen calls comparative mind, the ego's plan for establishing its worth by lowering others. When we find proof of their humanity, their mistakes, their moments of weakness, we feel temporarily raised up, as if their mistake somehow increases our own goodness. The worker rushed to judgment based on looks, never considering the full story of what he had found. Maybe the fish was donated food that would have been wasted. Maybe it was medicine prescribed for a sick monk. Maybe it represented an act of kindness rather than greed. His assumption that he understood the complete moral picture from a single piece of proof reveals the dangerous simplicity of self-righteous thinking. We can see this same pattern in our daily interactions. How quickly we jump to conclusions about people's reasons based on limited information. A co-worker leaves early and we assume laziness, never considering family duties. A friend doesn't respond to messages and we assume they don't care, never considering their personal struggles. A spiritual teacher makes a human mistake and we assume they are fake, never considering the full complexity of their situation. Zen master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." This wisdom points us toward examining our interpretations and judgments rather than simply accepting them as accurate pictures of reality. The master's response shows a deep teaching about spiritual authority and humility. Rather than becoming defensive, denying the accusation or punishing those involved, he used the moment to reveal something deeper about the nature of rules, practice, and human nature itself. His confession that he once ate fish so completely that no bones remained is both funny and illuminating. It admits a shared humanity while suggesting that true spiritual growth might involve growing beyond the need for such strict outside controls. This story also points us toward understanding the difference between the spirit and letter of spiritual practice. Rules and guidelines exist to support our growth. But when they become sources of judgment and comparison, they can actually stop the very growth they were designed to encourage. Beyond this, there comes another layer of teaching about the nature of proof and assumption. The worker believed that fish bones proved moral failing, but what if they proved something else entirely? Perhaps the very kindness and letting go that the monastery sought to grow. Tonight, as you notice yourself quick to judge others based on limited proof or outside looks, can you pause and consider what you might not be seeing? Can you remember moments when your own actions might have appeared questionable to others who didn't understand the full story? As the Buddha taught, hatred is never calmed by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred calmed. This is a law eternal. When we meet others' apparent imperfections with judgment and moral superiority, we create separation. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about happiness and the nature of wanting. This is the stonecutter's journey. High in the mountain villages, there lived a simple stone cutter who had found the secret of happiness without knowing it. Each dawn, he would climb winding paths to the rock pits, his tools balanced across his shoulders. As he worked among the stones, he would sing old mountain songs that echoed across the valleys. Though he was poor by society's measures, living in a small hut with few things, the stone cutter wanted nothing more than what he had. His simple life felt complete. The rhythm of his work, the beauty of the mountains, the joy of honest work. His heart held not a care in the world. One day he was called to work on the big mansion of a rich nobleman. As he walked up to the estate, his eyes widened at the beauty before him. Marble columns reached toward the sky. Gardens spread in perfect balance. For the first time in his life, the stone cutter felt the sharp pain of wanting pierce his happiness. If only I were rich, he sighed. Then I would not have to earn my living in sweat and hard work as I do now. To his amazement, a voice whispered from the stones, "Your wish has been granted. From now on, anything you desire will be given to you." He returned home that evening to find his humble hut replaced by a mansion as grand as the nobleman's. Overwhelmed with joy, he left his tools and began enjoying the fancy life of the wealthy. But one hot afternoon, looking from his fancy window, he saw the king's royal parade passing by. The king sat in cool shade, surrounded by noble men and servants, appearing calm and powerful above the common heat. "How I wish I were a king myself," he thought, and immediately found himself lying in silk cushions inside the royal carriage. But the carriage proved warmer than expected. Even through thick walls, the sun's heat came through relentlessly. "I wish I were the sun," he declared, and found himself sending waves of light and heat across the universe. As the sun, he felt magnificent and all-powerful until thick storm clouds gathered, completely blocking his rays. "I wish to be a cloud." And so he became a massive storm cloud, enjoying his power to block the sun. But as he turned into falling rain, he met a huge rock that blocked his path completely. "A mere rock more powerful than I wish to be a rock." Suddenly he stood tall upon the mountainside, feeling he had achieved true lasting power. But soon he heard chipping sounds at his base. Looking down, he saw a tiny human figure cutting chunks of stone away. "A puny creature more powerful than me. I want to be a man again." And so he found himself once more a stone cutter climbing familiar mountain paths. But now something had changed. As he shaped stones and felt mountain breezes, his heart swelled with deep happiness. His song returned richer than before because he had learned to be happy with exactly who he was. The Buddha once said, "Health is the greatest gift. contentment, the greatest wealth. This ancient wisdom shows the endless cycle of wanting that keeps us from recognizing the riches already present in our lives. Why do we chase after different conditions, always believing happiness lies in the next change? Each desire fulfilled only reveals the next desire, creating an endless cycle of unhappiness. The stonecutter's journey reveals the uselessness of seeking happiness through outside circumstances. Think about your own versions of this cycle. I'll be happy when I get promoted, only to discover new stresses. I'll be happy with more money, only to find greater wealth brings new worries. Each achievement reveals the next mountain to climb. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This puzzle points to the heart of contentment, the ability to fully accept what is while still engaging completely with life's natural changes. The stonecutter's final change wasn't into something greater, but into appreciation for what he had always been. His work remained the same, but his relationship to life was completely changed. Happiness isn't found in having different experiences, but in bringing different awareness to whatever experiences happen. Tonight, as you notice the mind's habitual reaching toward what isn't here, can you try the stonecutter's final wisdom? Can you find the song that comes when you stop trying to be anything other than what you are? As the Buddha taught, contentment is natural wealth, luxury is artificial poverty. The greatest change available isn't becoming something different, but recognizing the built-in completeness of what we already are. Let us continue with a story about the limits of understanding and the honesty of not knowing. This is the teaching of the Emperor and Master Gudo. The Emperor of Japan, a man used to receiving definite answers from his advisors and scholars, had arranged a private meeting with Master Gudo, one of the most respected Zen teachers in the land. The emperor came with real curiosity about spiritual matters, particularly questions about life, death, and what might lie beyond ordinary understanding. Seated in the formal room where matters of state were usually discussed, the emperor felt comfortable asking even the deepest questions to this famous master. After all, if anyone would possess answers to life's deepest mysteries, surely it would be an enlightened Zen teacher who had spent decades in thinking and practice. Master Gudo, the emperor began with the directness that comes from a lifetime of authority. I have a question that has troubled many great minds throughout history. What happens to a man of enlightenment after death? Surely someone of your spiritual level would understand such matters. The emperor expected a deep talk on the nature of mind after physical death. Perhaps ideas into rebirth, karma, or the forever nature of enlightened awareness. He was prepared to hear about subtle worlds, the melting of individual mind into cosmic unity, or other high teachings that would satisfy his curiosity about this ultimate mystery. Instead, Master Gudo looked at the emperor with complete calmness and gave the most honest answer possible. How should I know? The emperor was taken aback. Here was a master looked up to throughout the land for his wisdom, basically admitting ignorance about what seemed like a basic spiritual question. But master, the emperor pressed, somewhat shocked, you are an enlightened teacher. Surely you must have special knowledge about such things. Gudo's response was immediate and perfectly logical. Yes, sir, but not a dead one. The simplicity of this exchange contains a deep teaching about the nature of real wisdom and the difference between real understanding and pretended knowledge. As the Buddha taught, I know nothing except the fact of my ignorance. This ancient wisdom shows the deep honesty that marks true spiritual maturity. The willingness to admit the limits of one's knowledge rather than pretending to understand what cannot be known from one's current position. Why do we expect spiritual teachers to have answers to questions that can only be resolved through direct experience? Zen Buddhism highlights the importance of telling the difference between book knowledge and lived understanding, between what we can guess about and what we can actually know. Master Gudo's response wasn't a failure of wisdom, but a show of it. He refused to engage in guessing about experiences he hadn't had, even when pressed by someone in a position of great authority. His honesty revealed more wisdom than any fancy theory about post-death mind could have provided. Think about how often in daily life we pretend to know things we don't actually know. Whether it is offering confident opinions about complex social issues, giving definite advice about other people's relationships, or claiming certainty about uncertain outcomes. We often feel pressured to appear smart rather than admitting the limits of our understanding. The emperor's assumption that enlightenment should include knowledge about death reflects a common wrong idea about spiritual growth. We imagine that waking up provides a huge database of cosmic information rather than a fundamental shift in how we relate to not knowing. In Zen practice, we grow what Suzuki Roshi called "don't know mind," a state of open awareness that doesn't need to fill every gap in understanding with theories or beliefs. This isn't ignorance, but a wise recognition that direct experience is more valuable than second-hand information. Zen Master Linji taught, there is nothing special to do, nothing special to learn. Enlightenment doesn't grant magical knowledge about matters beyond ordinary experience. A living master knows about living. What happens after death remains in the realm of guessing until one actually dies. The Buddha said, "Believe nothing merely because you have been told it, but whatsoever after due examination and analysis you find to be conducive to the good, the benefit, the welfare of all beings, that doctrine believe and cling to." Even the Buddha encouraged direct investigation over accepting claims based on authority. Gudo's teaching reveals the freedom that comes from releasing the need to have opinions about everything. How much mental energy do we waste building theories about things we cannot possibly know? How much suffering comes from worrying about scenarios we can only imagine? Look deeply at your own relationship with not knowing. Where do you pretend certainty to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty? What would change if you could say, "I don't know," with the same confidence that Master Gudo showed? The emperor sought knowledge about death from someone who was vibrantly alive. But true wisdom might be found not in gathering information about future experiences, but in fully engaging with present reality. The mystery of death is honored not by pretending to solve it, but by living really in the face of it. Tonight, as you encounter questions about the future, about others' reasons, or about cosmic mysteries, can you remember Master Gudo's honest simplicity? Can you find the courage to admit when you don't know? Discovering that don't know mind might be wiser than all our clever theories. Buddha's wisdom reminds us the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. In a world full of false certainties and confident ignorance, the Master's honest, "How should I know?" points toward a more real relationship with mystery. One that honors what cannot be known while fully embracing what can be directly experienced. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a teaching about the deep freedom that comes through releasing our attachment to identity. This is the story of a seeker's ultimate discovery. For countless years, a devoted monk has wandered through far lands, seeking the legendary realm where Buddha himself lives. This quest has consumed his entire adult life, driving him through hot deserts, over dangerous mountain passes, and across vast plains where few travelers dare go. Every step has been motivated by an unshakable belief that somewhere beyond the ordinary world lies a perfect place where all suffering ends and ultimate truth becomes directly reachable. His journey has required huge sacrifice. He has given up the comfort of a settled home, the safety of a steady community, and the simple pleasures that make ordinary life meaningful. His body bears the marks of this long trip, feet hardened by endless walking, skin weathered by exposure to harsh weather, and the thin frame of someone who has often gone without enough food in search of his spiritual goal. Yet his dedication never wavered. In his mind, every hardship endured brings him closer to the final destination. Every monastery where he stops to rest becomes a stepping stone toward the final teaching. Every master he meets offers clues that might guide him toward the sacred land where Buddha awaits those worthy of direct instruction. Finally, after decades of searching, the monk receives reliable information about his destination. Travelers speak with certainty about a great river that forms the border of Buddha's realm. Beyond this water lies the land he has sought throughout his adult life, where enlightenment itself takes form as a place that can be entered and experienced. When he reaches the river's edge, his heart pounds with excitement and respect. The water flows wide and deep, separating him from the end of everything he has worked toward. This is the final barrier between his seeking and his ultimate goal. With prayers on his lips and gratitude flooding his being, he enters the current and begins swimming toward the far shore. Midway across the river, something floating in the water catches his attention. As it drifts closer, he realizes with growing horror that it is a human body, swollen and decaying from days in the river. But as his eyes focus more clearly on the lifeless face, shock crashes through his entire being like lightning. The corpse is his own body. Every feature is unmistakably his own. The same face that has looked back at him from still pools during his travels. The same hands that have held prayer beads through countless meditations. The same body that has carried him across half the world in search of enlightenment. Terror and confusion overwhelm him as he stares at his own death floating past. How can this be possible? How can he be both alive in the water and dead in the current? What kind of mystical things has he met at the very doorstep of Buddha's land? As the corpse continues downstream, carrying with it every idea he has ever held about who he is, what he has done, and where he is going, something deep shifts in his mind. All his ideas about himself as a seeker, a monk, a person with a spiritual destination, melt in the rushing water. Everything he has thought he was flows away with the current. In this moment of complete confusion, when every familiar reference point for identity has vanished, he experiences his first taste of real freedom. The person who has been seeking enlightenment no longer exists, and yet awareness itself remains huge and unchanged by the loss of its previous container. The Buddha understood that you are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement. This tale unveils the ultimate puzzle of spiritual seeking. The very self that pursues enlightenment must dissolve for waking up to occur. Why is the melting of ego identity so important for spiritual realization? Buddhist psychology explains that our sense of being a separate self is the basic trick that creates all other forms of suffering. As long as we keep the fiction of being an independent entity pursuing spiritual goals, we remain trapped within the very framework that enlightenment goes beyond. The monk's shock at seeing his own body represents every seeker's eventual meeting with the death of who they think they are. This ego death isn't a punishment or failure, but the essential first step for recognizing what we have always been beneath our self-ideas. The person who begins the spiritual journey cannot be the same person who finishes it, because finishing requires the melting away of the traveler. This story operates on multiple levels at the same time. Literally, it might describe a mystical vision or deep meditation experience. Psychologically, it represents the moment when our investment in personal identity finally collapses under the weight of deeper seeing. Spiritually, it points toward what Zen calls great death, the complete letting go that comes before real rebirth. The river serves as a powerful symbol for the change between ordinary consciousness and enlightened awareness. Rivers have always symbolized borders between different states of being, and crossing water often represents irreversible change. The monk cannot return to his previous understanding after witnessing his own death floating away. The location of this experience at the very doorstep of Buddha's land suggests that closeness to enlightenment increases rather than eliminates the challenges of spiritual growth. The closer we come to real awakening, the more thoroughly our ego defenses may attempt to reassert control, and the more completely they must be given up. Buddhist teacher Suzuki Roshi taught that you are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement. The monk was already Buddha nature seeking itself. But his identification with being a seeker prevented him from recognizing this truth. Only by witnessing the death of the seeker could the source reveal itself as what had been present all along. This melting doesn't mean we become unconscious or lose our ability to function. Rather, we discover what remains when our stories about ourselves fall away. Beneath the narrator of our personal drama lies awareness itself. Unconditioned, unborn, and unafraid of any experience, including the experience of its own apparent death. The teaching points toward what advanced students call dying before death, voluntarily releasing our grip on identity while still alive, so that physical death, when it comes, feels more like changing clothes than ending existence. This isn't scary interest, but practical preparation for the ultimate letting go that awaits everyone. The monk's terror, followed by freedom, shows the emotional journey that often accompanies ego melting. Initial fear gives way to relief as we discover that what we thought we might lose was actually a burden we have been carrying unnecessarily. The self we have been protecting so carefully turns out to be a case of mistaken identity. Zen master Huang Po taught that nothing is gained by adding, nothing is lost by subtracting. The monk's experience demonstrates this rule. Seeing his corpse float away added nothing to his true nature, while taking away nothing essential. What remained after the melting was what had been present before his seeking began. Tonight, as you think about the various identities and self-ideas you carry, can you imagine what might remain if they all floated away like the monk's corpse? Perhaps you will discover that what you fear losing was never who you actually are, and what you are can never be threatened by any change. As the Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Sometimes learning to let go includes releasing our grip on the very self that is trying to learn. Our next story reveals the deep difference between spiritual acting and real understanding. This is the teaching of the head that wished to be cut off. In the great monastery of Chao, where hundreds of monks gathered daily for meditation and study, the morning routines followed ancient rhythms. After the pre-dawn sitting, as the first light touched the mountain peaks surrounding the monastery, monks would scatter to their various duties, some to the gardens, others to the kitchens, still others to copying sacred texts or maintaining the buildings. One particular morning, the respected Abbot Chao Cho made his usual walk through the monastery grounds, checking on the well-being of his students and the condition of their practice. His presence was both gentle and sharp. Monks never knew when their most casual words might become profound teachings, or when their deepest spiritual insights might be revealed as mere book ideas. As he passed behind the main meditation hall, a building where the community gathered twice daily for silent sitting, the abbot noticed a young monk sitting alone in the shadow of the wooden structure. The monk appeared to be engaged in some form of practice, though he was apart from the scheduled community activities. "Brother," Chao called softly, walking up with the quiet steps that had become second nature through decades of mindful walking. "Where have all the virtuous ones gone?" The question seemed simple enough, almost like casual conversation, but those familiar with Chao Cho's teaching style recognized the subtle depth in his question. Was he asking about physical location, spiritual level, or something else entirely? The young monk looked up with a look of confident understanding. He had been at the monastery for several years and prided himself on grasping the main points of Zen teaching. This seemed like a chance to show his understanding of the Dharma. "They have all gone to work," the monk replied simply, pointing toward the various parts of the monastery where his brothers were engaged in their daily tasks. His tone suggested that the answer was obvious. Virtuous people naturally engage in productive activity rather than sitting idle. What happened next shocked the young monk completely. Without warning, Chao reached into the folds of his robe and pulled out a sharp knife, its blade shining in the morning sunlight. But instead of threatening the monk, the abbot did something far more upsetting. With complete calmness, Chao stretched out his own neck, showing his throat to the blade, and handed the knife to the confused young monk. His voice remained gentle and chatty, as if he were making the most reasonable request in the world. "My responsibilities as abbot are many and demanding," he said with apparent honesty. "I wonder if you could please cut off my head for me. It would be such a help in managing my duties." The young monk's eyes widened in horror. His hands shook as he stared at the knife now in his possession and the exposed neck of his respected teacher. Everything about the situation went against his understanding of proper monk behavior, spiritual teaching, and basic human kindness. Unable to understand what was being asked of him or why, unable to see past the literal surface of the abbot's request to any deeper meaning, the terrified monk dropped the knife and ran. His feet carried him far from the meditation hall, far from the confusing scene, his mind spinning with confusion and fear. Chao calmly picked up the fallen knife, tucked it back into his robe, and continued his morning walk with the same peaceful manner he had kept throughout the entire meeting. As the Buddha observed, "It is better to travel well than to arrive." What comes from this story is a teaching about the huge difference between book understanding and real realization. Why do we so often mistake book knowledge for true wisdom? Zen Buddhism reveals that our thinking mind loves to collect spiritual ideas and organize them into neat categories, creating the illusion of understanding without the changing experience of direct insight. The young monk's response, "They have all gone to work," represents the kind of split thinking that separates spiritual practice from ordinary activity. His answer implied that goodness lies in doing productive tasks rather than sitting idly, revealing his assumption that awakened activity and rest exist against each other. But Chao's teaching cuts much deeper than this surface interpretation. By offering his neck to the knife, he was asking a deep question. If the monk truly understood that all the virtuous ones had gone to work, what work was most essential? If responsibility truly mattered, what was the most kind response to suffering? Look deeply at your own spiritual assumptions. How often do we divide life into spiritual activities and boring ones, important work and small tasks, sacred moments and ordinary time? This split thinking keeps us from recognizing that every moment offers chances for awakened response. The abbot's motion points toward the heart of Zen understanding. Real kindness sometimes requires actions that go beyond normal thinking. When someone is truly suffering under the weight of responsibility, attachment, or spiritual seeking itself, what is the most loving response? Sometimes it requires cutting through the very thing that seems most precious, our ideas, our roles, even our sense of separate self. Zen master Linji taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha." This famous saying points to the same radical teaching Xiao Cho offered. Any fixed idea about enlightenment, any attachment to spiritual roles or ideas, becomes an obstacle to direct realization. True kindness sometimes requires destroying the very thing we think we are trying to protect. The young monk's terror and running away revealed how completely he missed this deeper level of teaching. He remained trapped in literal interpretation, unable to see past the surface of the abbot's words to their changing invitation. His spiritual understanding, though spoken well, remained purely in his head. Think about your own relationship to spiritual responsibility and helping others. When someone asks for help with their suffering, do we offer ideas and advice? Or do we respond from a deeper place of understanding? Are we willing to sacrifice our comfortable spiritual positions to meet others exactly where they are? This ancient wisdom shows the difference between talking about goodness and being it. The monk could identify where good people go and what they do, but when faced with a chance for radical kindness, he fled. His knowledge remained separate from spontaneous awakened action. In Zen practice, we grow what is called great doubt, a willingness to question even our most loved spiritual understandings. This doubt isn't being negative, but openness to discoveries that go beyond our current mental frameworks. Are we prepared to have our spiritual certainties challenged, even destroyed, if it serves awakening? Tonight, as you encounter chances to help others with their burdens, can you sense the difference between offering what you think they need and responding from real understanding? Can you feel how true kindness sometimes requires cutting through your own comfortable assumptions about what makes appropriate spiritual behavior? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "In caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others." The abbot's offer to sacrifice his own head points toward this connected understanding. When we truly see interconnection, the lines between self and other, helper and helped, begin to melt into spontaneous kind action. Let us continue our journey with a story about kind teaching and the deep wisdom that can come from moments of rule breaking. This is the Master's head as a footstool. Not far from Master Sengai's temple lay a district that came alive after dark, with lantern light and laughter, where fun places attracted visitors seeking entertainment, far removed from the strict thinking of monk life. Despite the strict rules governing their conduct, many of the younger monks found themselves drawn to these worldly attractions, their human desires proving stronger than their spiritual promises. The temple wall was quite high, built to keep the sacred boundary between the monastery and the outside world beyond. Yet where there is desire, there is often cleverness. The monks, who felt forced to venture into the fun district, had come up with a practical solution to their building challenge. They would leave a wooden footstool beneath the wall to help them climb over on their way out, and more importantly, to help their sneaky return before dawn prayers. Master Sengai, of course, was well aware of these night trips. The community was small, and the signs of his students' adventures were not difficult to find. But rather than confronting them directly or using harsh punishments, he chose to address the situation with typical wisdom and kindness. One evening, at the hour when he knew the wayward monks would be returning from their trip into worldly pleasures, Master Sengai quietly placed himself beneath the wall. He removed the wooden foot-tool they usually used and sat down in its place, settling into meditation posture as he waited patiently for their return. Toward dawn, just as expected, the monks came tiptoeing back to the temple, moving with the careful sneakiness of those who hope to avoid being seen. They climbed the wall from the outside and began lowering themselves down into the temple grounds, their feet searching in the darkness for the familiar footstool they always left behind. To their confusion, the wooden step seemed to be missing from its usual place. They felt around with their feet, trying to locate it in the pre-dawn shadows. Finally, they felt something solid beneath them that would support their weight. And one by one, they stepped down carefully into the temple yard, using this unexpected but welcome replacement for their missing footstool. As their eyes adjusted to the darkness and the first light of dawn began to light up the temple grounds, the monks were horrified to discover what they had used as their stepping stone. There, still seated in perfect meditation posture, was the shaved head of Master Sengai himself. They had been stepping on their teacher's head to finish their secret return. Shaking with shame and fear at what they had done, the monks immediately bowed on the ground, expecting severe punishment for their mistake. They had not only broken the monk rules by visiting the fun places, but had added to their offense by literally using their respected teacher as a footstool. But Master Sengai's response went against all their expectations. Rather than expressing anger or disappointment, he spoke with gentle sadness, taking full responsibility for their behavior. "Your misbehavior," he said quietly, "is due to my own carelessness in teaching. I have failed to provide you with the guidance and inspiration you needed to find fulfillment within our spiritual practice. The Buddha once said, 'Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love.' This is the eternal rule. This ancient wisdom shows the changing power of responding to wrongdoing with kindness rather than punishment, and the deep teaching that can come when we take responsibility for our role in others' mistakes. This story unveils something revolutionary about effective teaching and leadership. Instead of using his student's mistake as a chance to show power or deliver stern lectures about discipline, Master Sengai changed the moment into a deep lesson about responsibility, humility, and kindness. Why do we typically respond to others' mistakes with blame and punishment rather than examining our own part in the situation? This pattern reflects our deep training to see problems as outside issues requiring correction, rather than chances for deeper understanding and real change. We focus on fixing the symptom rather than addressing the underlying causes. The monk's night adventures revealed something important about human nature and the limits of purely restrictive approaches to spiritual growth. Their desire for worldly pleasure wasn't eliminated by monastery walls and strict rules. It was simply driven underground, creating a pattern of secret rule-breaking and guilt, rather than genuine change. Master Sengai understood that effective spiritual teaching must work with human nature, rather than simply fighting it. By admitting his own role in their behavior, he showed a crucial rule. When people under our guidance or influence act in problematic ways, our first question should be, how have I added to this situation, rather than how should I punish them? This teaching reveals the difference between authority based on control and authority based on wisdom. The master could have used this incident to reinforce power structures, making examples of the wayward monks to stop future rule-breaking. Instead, he chose to use his authority to show the very qualities, humility, responsibility, kindness that he hoped to grow in his students. We can see similar things in many areas of life where people in positions of responsibility interact with those under their guidance. The parent whose child acts out might consider whether their own stress or lack of attention added to the behavior. The manager whose employees do poorly might examine whether unclear expectations or poor support played a role. The teacher whose students tune out might reflect on whether their methods are truly serving their learners' needs. Zen teachings show another aspect of this story through the idea of interconnection. Master Sengai recognized that his students' behavior didn't occur alone. It came from the complex web of relationships, teachings, restrictions, and unmet needs that made up their shared environment. By taking responsibility for his part in this web, he opened the possibility for genuine change. This ancient wisdom also points us toward understanding the power of unexpected responses to break established patterns. The monks returned expecting to sneak back unseen, but instead met their teacher's head as a footstool. This shocking reverse of expectations created an opening for genuine learning that normal punishment could never have achieved. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that maintaining authority requires consistent use of rules and boundaries. Master Sengai's response suggests a different model, that true authority sometimes expresses itself through openness, admission of limits, and willingness to share responsibility for problems rather than simply forcing solutions. The story also reveals the deep teaching potential that exists within moments of apparent failure or mistake. What at first appeared to be a disciplinary crisis became a chance for showing the very kindness and wisdom the monastery existed to grow. The monks learned more about true spiritual authority from this single incident than they might have from years of formal instruction. Beyond this, there comes a teaching about the courage required for genuine leadership. It takes tremendous inner strength to respond to others' wrongdoing by examining our own contributions rather than simply asserting our goodness. Master Sengai's willingness to use his own head as a footstool, both literally and symbolically, showed the kind of selfless service that changes communities. Tonight, as you consider situations where people in your life have acted in ways that annoyed or disappointed you, can you identify how you might have added to these patterns? What would it mean to take responsibility for your part in creating the conditions that led to their behavior while still maintaining appropriate boundaries and expectations? As the Buddha taught, In the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. When we melt the artificial separation between teacher and student, leader and follower, guide and guided, we discover that true change occurs through shared responsibility and mutual kindness rather than power control. Now let us explore a Zen story about the irreplaceable nature of direct spiritual sharing. This is the tale of Bankai and the messenger. In the busy capital city where merchants bartered in crowded marketplaces and scholars debated in tea houses, the famous Zen master Bankai had completed another period of teaching at one of the great temples. Known throughout the region for his deep insight and ability to point students directly toward their Buddha nature, Bankai maintained a simple practice of traveling between temples, offering instruction wherever sincere students gathered. As the master prepared to leave for his next destination, carefully folding his few things into a traveling bundle, a well-dressed gentleman walked up to him with urgent politeness. The man's fine silk robes and careful manner suggested someone used to moving in high circles, likely a helper or aide to one of the noble families that supported the temple. "Respected master," the gentleman said, bowing deeply, "I come with a request from the Baron, a man of great learning and sincere interest in your teachings. He has heard of your wisdom and wishes desperately to meet with you personally, but urgent matters have kept him today. Would you consider delaying your departure by one day so that he might have the honor of studying with you tomorrow?" Bankai, despite his eagerness to reach the next temple where students awaited him, recognized the genuine need in the request. The path of a teacher required flexibility and kindness even when inconvenient. "Of course," he replied simply. "I shall remain one more day." The master unpacked his bundle and settled back into the temple quarters, spending the evening in quiet meditation and preparation for what he expected would be a meaningful meeting with a sincere seeker. He had met many nobles over the years who approached Zen with genuine humility despite their worldly status, and he looked forward to offering whatever guidance might be helpful. The next morning arrived with clear skies and the sound of temple bells calling the community to meditation. Bankai waited in his meeting room as the appointed time approached, but instead of the Baron himself, the same well-dressed gentleman appeared again, this time with obvious embarrassment written across his face. "Master," the man began, his voice heavy with apology, "I bring sad news. The Baron was called away on urgent business that could not be delayed, matters of state that demanded his immediate attention. However, he has not forgotten his desire for your teaching. He has asked me to serve as his representative to receive your instruction on his behalf and carry your wisdom back to him faithfully." The gentleman paused, clearly hoping this arrangement would prove acceptable. The Baron's specific question concerns the nature of mind itself. He wishes to understand what is the true nature of consciousness and how can one realize it directly. If you would share your teaching on this matter, I promise to convey every word exactly as you speak it. Bankai listened to this request with gentle attention, his expression remaining calm and kind. When the gentleman finished speaking, the master sat quietly for a moment, as if considering not just the question, but the entire situation, the absent seeker, the well-meaning messenger, and the deep impossibility of what was being asked. Finally, Bankai spoke with typical simplicity and directness. "This matter of Zen is difficult to share even through direct question and answer between teacher and student meeting face to face. It becomes all the more difficult, indeed impossible, to send through a messenger, no matter how sincere or capable that messenger might be." Having delivered this response, the master said nothing more. He simply sat in silence, showing the very teaching he had just spoken. The gentleman waited, perhaps expecting more details or other suggestions, but none came. Eventually, finding himself speechless and somewhat confused, the gentleman bowed politely and left the temple. The Buddha once said, "Be a lamp unto yourself." This deep truth reveals itself in Bankai's gentle but firm refusal to reduce Zen wisdom to a message that could be carried by someone else. Spiritual awakening cannot be passed on secondhand because it is not information, but change. Why do we often approach spiritual learning as if it were school knowledge that can be collected and sent through others? Zen Buddhism teaches that awakening is not an idea to be understood, but a reality to be directly experienced. Like the taste of water to someone who is thirsty, it cannot be described well enough. It must be experienced firsthand. The Baron's question about the nature of mind reveals our typical approach to spiritual questions. We want to understand awareness intellectually, to grasp it as an idea, to possess it as knowledge. But consciousness cannot be made into an object of study because it is the very subject doing the studying. It is like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The seeing itself is what you are trying to see. Think about how often throughout your day you might approach spiritual wisdom as information to be collected rather than truth to be lived. We read books about meditation instead of meditating. We study descriptions of enlightenment instead of investigating our present experience. We seek answers about the nature of mind instead of directly examining what we call mind right now. Zen Master Dogen taught to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. This puzzle points to the heart of why spiritual sharing requires direct engagement. The self that wants to understand Buddhism intellectually is the very construction that must be seen through. This seeing through happens not through gathering knowledge, but through close investigation of immediate experience. The messenger in the story represents our own tendency to approach awakening indirectly. We want to understand consciousness from a safe distance, keeping the illusion that we are separate watchers, studying an object called awareness. But awareness is what we are, not what we have. It cannot be possessed, understood, or sent, because we are expressions of it. Bankai's silence, after his brief explanation, was itself a teaching. In Zen, silence often shows what words cannot. The gaps between thoughts, the space between breaths, the awareness in which all experiences arise. These cannot be captured in language, but can be directly recognized when we stop trying to grasp them with ideas. This doesn't mean spiritual teaching is impossible or that teachers serve no purpose. Rather, it means that real teaching points students toward their own direct experience rather than providing second-hand descriptions of someone else's realization. The teacher's role is not to deliver enlightenment, but to create conditions where students might recognize what they already are. Tonight, as you experience the simple fact of being conscious, aware of these words, aware of your body, aware of the space in which thoughts and feelings appear, can you investigate this awareness directly rather than through ideas? Can you be present to your experience rather than trying to understand it through someone else's descriptions? As the Buddha taught, work out your own salvation with hard work. The path to freedom cannot be walked by someone else. It requires your own feet, your own breath, your own willingness to look directly at what you have always been, but perhaps never clearly seen. Let us explore a story about the true nature of our emotional patterns. This is temper. In a peaceful monastery where cherry blossoms drifted like snow across stone pathways, a troubled man approached the famous Zen master Bankai. The visitor's face bore the weight of years of struggle, his shoulders tense with the burden he carried within. "Master," the man said, bowing deeply, "I have come seeking your wisdom, because I suffer from a terrible problem. I was born with an uncontrollable temper that explodes without warning. No matter how hard I try to push it down, this anger comes out and destroys my relationships, my peace, and my happiness. I have tried everything: meditation, prayer, even avoiding people altogether, but nothing works. Can you help me overcome this curse I was born with?" Bankai listened with gentle attention, observing not just the man's words, but the honesty in his voice and the genuine desire for freedom from suffering. The master's eyes held a knowing kindness, as if he could see something the visitor could not. "What a fascinating thing you describe," Bankai replied with genuine curiosity. "This terrible temper you were born with. I would very much like to see it. In fact, If you can show it to me right now, I will cure it for you immediately." The man paused, confused by this unexpected request. He looked within himself, scanning his inner world for the familiar flames of anger. But in this moment, sitting before the wise teacher in the quiet setting, he found only calm awareness. "Well, Master, I don't actually have the temper right now," he admitted. "It is not here at this moment. It only appears suddenly when certain things happen, when someone criticizes me, or when I am frustrated, or when things don't go as planned." Bankai nodded slowly, a gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Ah, I see. So, this temper that you claim you were born with, it is not actually with you right now. It only appears under certain conditions. If it were truly something you were born with, something that was your basic nature, wouldn't it be present all the time?" The man's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. If his anger was truly built in, truly part of his fixed nature, it would never leave him. But here he sat, completely calm, the anger nowhere to be found. "In that case," Bankai continued softly, "this short temper is not something built into you at all. The Buddha once said, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. This ancient wisdom shows the deep truth that anger, like all emotions, is not a permanent part of our identity, but a temporary feeling that we often mistake for our basic nature. Why do we convince ourselves that difficult emotions are just who we are?" Zen Buddhism reveals several patterns that create this misunderstanding. When we repeatedly experience certain emotional reactions, we begin to identify with them so completely that we cannot imagine ourselves without them. We say, "I am an angry person," rather than "anger sometimes comes up in my experience." This identification serves as a form of mental protection. If we believe our reactions are fixed and unchangeable, we avoid the responsibility and the freedom that comes with recognizing our ability to respond differently. It feels safer to say, "This is just how I am," than to acknowledge the more empowering truth that we have choice in every moment. Think about how often throughout your day you might declare aspects of your experience as permanent parts of your identity. "I am not a morning person. I am terrible with technology. I am just naturally anxious." Each of these statements reinforces the trick that our patterns are unchangeable rather than simply habits that can be changed through awareness and practice. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This puzzle points to the truth that while our essential nature is already whole and complete, the patterns we have layered over that nature through training can be examined and shifted. The man in our story discovered what meditation students call the gap, the space between thoughts, the pause between reactions, where our true nature exists unmarked by temporary emotional weather. In that gap, he could see clearly that anger was not his identity, but simply a trained response that came up under certain conditions. When we recognize that our difficult emotions are visitors rather than permanent residents, we can greet them differently. Instead of, "I am angry," we might observe, "Anger is coming up." This subtle shift creates space for the emotion to be present, without eating up our entire identity. Tonight, as you reflect on the patterns you might have labeled as just who you are, can you find the spaces where these patterns are absent? Can you locate the aware presence that remains constant, whether anger, sadness, or joy is present? As the Buddha taught, you are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions, you are the awareness that watches them. In recognizing this difference, we discover the freedom that was always available beneath our trained responses. Now, let us explore a Zen story about flowing with natural forces and the deep wisdom of fitting in rather than fighting. This is the bamboo in the hut. Master Ryokan's mountain home was as simple and humble as his lifestyle. A small hut built with basic materials that provided enough shelter without any pretense to permanence or grandeur. The structure reflected his belief of taking only what was necessary from the natural environment, while remaining open to whatever changes the seasons and weather might bring. One spring, as the earth warmed and new life stirred throughout the mountain forests, something unexpected began happening beneath the wooden floorboards of the master's hut. Tiny bamboo shoots, following their ancient genetic programming to seek light and space for growth, started coming up from the soil below his living space. Most people finding this situation would have immediately seen it as a problem requiring fast action. Bamboo is known for its strong growth and its ability to damage buildings. Left alone, the shoots would certainly push up through the floorboards, creating holes and potentially hurting the safety of the entire building. The normal response would have been to cut away the bamboo before it could cause structural damage. But Master Ryokan saw the situation differently. Rather than viewing the emerging bamboo as an unwelcome intruder or a threat to his shelter, he chose to work with the natural forces at play. Without waiting, he began tearing up sections of his floorboards to create space for the bamboo shoots to grow freely toward the light they sought. As the weeks passed, the bamboo responded to his kindness by growing with remarkable speed and strength. The shoots rose higher and higher, soon reaching the ceiling of the small hut and pressing against the roof beams. Again, most people would have seen this as the point where big action became necessary. Either the bamboo had to be cut, or the house would be destroyed. Once again, Master Ryokan chose fitting in over fighting. He carefully removed sections of his roof to allow the bamboo to continue its upward growth, creating openings that let the shoots come out into the open air above his living space. The bamboo responded by growing through the roof and continuing to reach toward the sky. The final result of this process was amazing. Master Ryokan found himself living in a hut where living bamboo grew up through the floor and went through the roof, creating a unique home that was part human building and part natural forest. Rather than seeing this as a broken or damaged living situation, he embraced it as an improvement that brought him into even more close contact with natural processes. Untroubled by what others might consider a highly strange living arrangement, Master Ryokan simply continued his daily practices of meditation, study, and thinking. He sat in zazen beneath the living bamboo that now shared his dwelling space, finding that their presence added a quality of natural life and seasonal awareness that normal buildings could never provide. The bamboo became his close friends, growing and changing with the seasons, rustling softly in the wind, and creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted throughout the day. What had begun as a potential problem had been changed through his willingness to fit in natural forces into an improvement of his simple mountain life. As the Buddha observed, nothing is permanent except change. This teaching relates deeply to our ability for flowing with natural processes rather than stiffly defending our made-up plans and arrangements against the certain forces of growth and change. This ancient wisdom shows our typical approaches to unexpected changes in our carefully organized lives. Most of us invest huge energy in creating structures, physical, emotional, work, social, that we then feel forced to defend against any forces that might change them. We treat change as trouble rather than chance, as problems to be solved rather than invitations to discover new possibilities. Master Ryokan's response to the bamboo demonstrates a totally different relationship with the unexpected. Rather than seeing the shoots as invasive problems threatening his safety, he recognized them as natural expressions of life force seeking room to grow. His help for their needs led to a living situation that was far more interesting and lively than his original, unchanging home. Why do we typically resist natural processes of growth and change, even when they might lead to improvements in our circumstances? This resistance often comes from our attachment to knowing what comes next, and our fear that any change from our plans will lead to chaos or loss of control. We prefer the safety of familiar limits to the uncertainty of natural growth. The master's willingness to tear up his floorboards and change his roof represents the kind of basic flexibility that real spiritual practice grows. Rather than defending his comfort zone against all changes, he remained open to discovering what new forms of living might emerge through cooperation with forces beyond his control. This story reveals the difference between fitting in and giving up. Ryokan wasn't simply accepting whatever happened without response. He was actively participating in creating solutions that honored both his need for shelter and the bamboo's need for growing space. His actions were both practical and deeply cooperative with natural processes. We can observe similar chances for creative fitting in many areas of life. The parent whose carefully planned family routines are changed by a child's unexpected interests or needs. The business owner whose established ways need change to fit changing market conditions. The person whose life plans are changed by unforeseen events that could lead to entirely new possibilities. Zen practice grows what might be called adaptive wisdom, the ability to work creatively with whatever comes up rather than stiffly defending decided structures against natural processes of change and growth. This requires a basic trust that flow and adaptation often lead to outcomes better than our original fixed plans. The image of Master Ryokan meditating beneath living bamboo that grew through his home represents a deep teaching about fitting in with natural rhythms. Instead of seeing his spiritual practice as something that required complete separation from natural processes, he discovered how fitting in of natural growth could improve rather than hurt his quiet life. This teaching also points us toward understanding the difference between problems and opportunities. The bamboo shoots initially appeared to threaten the master's shelter, but his willingness to work with them creatively changed potential destruction into unusual improvement. Our ability to see challenges as invitations for creative response often determines whether difficulties become sources of growth or simply sources of stress. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that spiritual practice requires completely controlled environments free from unexpected intrusions. Master Ryokan's story suggests that real practice might actually be strengthened by learning to keep inner peace while fitting in whatever natural forces emerge in our immediate environment. The story reveals how often our ideas of proper order and appropriate boundaries can blind us to possibilities for richer, more integrated ways of living. The master's hut with bamboo growing through it challenged normal ideas about inside and outside spaces, but created a unique form of living that honored both human needs and natural processes. Beyond this, there comes a teaching about the creativity that can come when we stop fighting against what wants to happen and instead ask how we might work with coming forces to create something neither we nor they could have achieved alone. Tonight, as you consider areas of your life where unexpected changes or growth are challenging your established routines and structures, can you identify chances for creative fitting in rather than stiff resistance? What would it mean to tear up a few floorboards to make room for natural processes that might improve rather than threaten your overall well-being? Buddha's wisdom reminds us the wise find pleasure in water, virtue in mountains, and wisdom in forests. By learning to live in harmony with natural forces rather than constant fighting with them, we discover forms of safety and satisfaction that rigid control can never provide. The deep peace that comes from flowing with life rather than constantly struggling against it. Let us continue on our journey with a warning tale about the dangers of spiritual pride. This is the story of the clever monkey. In ancient China, the Prince of Wu decided to take a pleasure boat to the famous Monkey Mountain, a place known for its many animals and beautiful views. The prince, surrounded by his helpers and guards, approached the mountain with the casual confidence of royalty, expecting the natural world to accommodate his presence just as his human subjects did. As soon as the monkeys living in the forest saw the royal party, they ran in fear. The sound of chattering filled the air as dozens of monkeys scrambled up into the highest branches of the trees, their natural instinct warning them to hide from these human intruders. The forest, which moments before had been alive with playful monkey calls, fell silent except for the rustling of leaves as the creatures sought safety in the treetops. However, one monkey remained completely unconcerned by the royal presence. This particular monkey seemed utterly fearless, continuing his acrobatic show with remarkable skill and apparent lack of care to the danger below. He swung gracefully from branch to branch, performing fancy leaps and showing his skill as if putting on a show. His movements were smooth and confident, each motion showing his superior speed and smarts. Compared to his hiding friends, the Prince of Wu watched this extraordinary show with growing annoyance. Here was a mere animal that dared to show no respect for royal authority, that seemed to make fun of the very presence of the prince through its casual dismissal of the obvious threat. The monkey's confidence appeared to be a direct challenge to the prince's power. Deciding to teach this rude creature a lesson, the prince drew his bow and shot an arrow directly at the monkey. But to the amazement of all present, the monkey skillfully caught the arrow in mid-flight, picking it from the air as easily as one might catch a falling leaf. The monkey looked at the arrow briefly, then tossed it aside with casual dismissal, as if such tricks were nothing more than child's play. The prince's face darkened with rage at this embarrassment. His skill as an archer had been made to look foolish by a mere animal. "Attack!" he ordered his helpers. "Bring down this proud beast!" A storm of arrows filled the air. The monkey, suddenly overwhelmed by the big attack, could not block them all. In an instant, he was struck by many arrows and fell dead to the forest floor, his amazing abilities proving useless against such huge force. The prince turned to his wise friend, Yen Pui, who had watched this scene unfold with growing understanding. "You see what happened?" the prince said. "This animal advertised his cleverness. He trusted in his own skill. He thought no one could touch him. Remember that. Do not rely on being special and talent when you deal with men." Yen Pui absorbed this lesson deeply. When they returned to the kingdom, he thought on how his own achievements and fame might be creating the same dangerous pride that had destroyed the monkey. He quietly became the student of a humble sage. Seeking to rid himself of everything that made him appear outstanding or special, he gave up the pleasures that had once defined his status and learned to hide every difference that might set him apart from others. Through patient practice, Yen Pui grew such real humility that soon no one in the kingdom knew what to make of him. He had become so ordinary, so plain, that people began to sense something deep in his very ordinariness. Thus, they held him in awe, not for what he showed, but for the mysterious depth they sensed beneath his simple presence. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know." This tale shows the spiritual danger of making our wisdom or abilities into a source of identity and pride. Why do we feel forced to show our spiritual understanding or special qualities? Zen Buddhism reveals how the ego takes over even our most genuine insights, turning them into tools for maintaining separation and feeling better than others. The very achievements that should melt the sense of separate self can actually strengthen it when we become identified with being advanced or enlightened. The story points us toward understanding how spiritual pride works. Like the monkey, we may grow real abilities through practice, deeper calm, clearer insight, or greater kindness. But when we begin to identify with these qualities, when we use them to distinguish ourselves from others, they become weapons that ultimately destroy us. This ancient wisdom shows a puzzle at the heart of spiritual growth. The more we genuinely progress, the more invisible that progress should become. True wisdom naturally expresses itself as humility, because it reveals the connected nature of all existence, melting any basis for feeling better than others. Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki spoke of "don't know mind" as the heart of beginner's mind. This is not ignorance, but the wisdom that recognizes how little our book understanding actually penetrates the mystery of existence. The monkey's tragedy was believing his cleverness made him special rather than recognizing it as a temporary expression of universal intelligence. The Buddha taught, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Yen Pui discovered that by hiding his differences by becoming nothing special, he accessed a more deep kind of influence, one that touched others through presence rather than performance. Think about your own spiritual journey. Can you notice moments when insights or abilities become sources of subtle pride? When meditation experiences, psychological understanding, or kind actions become ways of feeling different from or better than others? Each time we make our practice into an identity, we create the spiritual equivalent of the monkey's dangerous display. Tonight, as you rest in simple being, can you practice the art of being nobody special? Can you find the freedom that comes not from showing your wisdom, but from resting in the ordinary mystery of awareness itself? As the Buddha said, those who are free of hateful thoughts surely find peace. The deepest peace comes when we release even our attachment to being peaceful. Now, let us explore a story about the difference between giving in and real understanding. This is the lesson of the proud priest and the gentle master. Master Bankai had gained quite a fame throughout the region. Unlike other teachers who filled their talks with complex arguments and long quotes from ancient books, Bankai spoke directly from his heart to the hearts of his listeners. His words were simple but deep, clear to farmers and scholars alike. People from all walks of life, merchants, servants, samurai, and monks, gathered to hear him speak about the natural peace that exists within every person. The master's growing popularity began to trouble a priest from the Nichiren sect, whose own temple had grown noticeably emptier as his followers left to hear about Zen. This priest had built his identity around being learned, respected, and obeyed. He prided himself on his knowledge of scriptures and his ability to win religious debates. The idea that a simple Zen teacher could attract his devoted followers with plain speaking felt like a personal insult. Determined to expose what he assumed must be shallow teaching disguised as wisdom, the Nichiren priest stormed into one of Bankai's gatherings. He pushed through the crowd of seated listeners, his robes blowing dramatically, his face stern with righteous anger. The peaceful feeling of quiet attention was suddenly charged with tension as people turned to see what was happening. "Hey, Zen teacher!" the priest called out loudly, his voice echoing through the hall. The deliberate rudeness of his address was unmistakable. He was treating the respected master like a common street performer. "Wait just a minute. I have something to say to you." Bankai looked up calmly from where he sat, showing no sign of annoyance or defensiveness at the interruption. His eyes held the same gentle attention he gave to every person who approached him, whether they came with genuine questions or angry challenges. "All these people here respect you and will obey whatever you say," the priest continued, his voice growing louder as he warmed to his challenge. "But a man like myself does not respect you at all. Can you make me obey you? Can your so-called wisdom force someone who sees through your simple tricks?" The crowd held its breath, expecting either an angry response or a smart answer that would put this proud challenger in his place. Instead, Bankai smiled with what appeared to be real warmth and curiosity. "Please come up beside me," the master said gently, "and I will show you." The priest, feeling winning that he had caused a response and confident in his ability to expose whatever trick was about to unfold, proudly pushed his way through the crowd to the front of the hall. He stood beside the master's simple cushion, his chest puffed out with self-importance, ready to show his freedom from this supposed authority. "Thank you," Bankai said with the same gentle smile. "Now we might hear each other better if you come over to my left side. Please step over here." Without thinking, the priest moved to Bankai's left side. It seemed like a reasonable request after all. "Actually," Bankai continued thoughtfully, "perhaps we could speak more clearly if you were on my right side instead. Would you mind stepping over there again?" The priest did it automatically. It was such a small, sensible change that he didn't even notice he was following instructions. Bankai's smile deepened, his eyes twinkling with gentle fun. "You see," he observed quietly, "you are already obeying me, and I think you are actually a very gentle, helpful person. Now please sit down and listen to what I have to share." The priest stood frozen, suddenly realizing what had just happened. He had come to show his independence and superiority, but had instead revealed his natural willingness to respond cooperatively to kind, reasonable requests. His whole argument had melted, not through force or clever talk, but through his own unconscious behavior. The crowd remained silent, but many people were struggling not to smile. They had witnessed something remarkable, not a defeat or humiliation, but a gentle revelation. The master had shown that true influence comes not from demanding obedience, but from inviting natural cooperation. The priest felt his anger and pride melting away, replaced by something he hadn't expected: curiosity. How had this simple man done what felt like magic? How had he changed a hostile fight into a moment of mutual understanding without ever raising his voice or asserting his power? Still somewhat dazed by the experience, the priest sat down. As Bankai began to speak again, the words seemed to bypass his thinking mind and speak directly to his heart. For the first time in years, he listened not to find flaws or prepare answers, but simply to hear what was being offered. Buddha's wisdom tells us, true obedience is not blind giving in, but conscious harmony. This ancient wisdom shows the difference between the compliance that comes from fear or social pressure and the natural cooperation that arises from genuine understanding. Why do we so often confuse authority with bossiness, influence with force? Zen Buddhism points to our training around power. We assume that getting others to cooperate requires force, manipulation, or the assertion of superiority. But the deepest teaching here shows us that true leadership comes from understanding human nature, not from overpowering it. The priest came expecting to meet someone who would try to control him, because that was the only model of authority he knew. When instead, he met someone who simply invited his natural cooperativeness. His entire framework for understanding power and influence was gently challenged. Think about your own experiences with authority. The teachers, bosses, or leaders who most positively influenced your life. Did they command your respect through force, or did they earn it by appealing to your better nature? The difference is profound. Forced compliance creates resentment and resistance, while invited cooperation creates genuine change. In our daily relationships, we often fall into the same trap as the priest. We approach conflicts assuming we need to overpower others to get what we want. We prepare arguments, gather our defenses, and ready ourselves for battle. But Bankai's approach suggests a different possibility. What if we assumed the best about others and invited their natural wisdom to come out? Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "When another person makes you suffer, it is because he suffers deeply within himself, and his suffering is spilling over." The priest's anger came from his own insecurity and fear of being replaced. Bankai's genius lay in seeing past the angry surface to the suffering underneath, then responding to the suffering rather than the anger. This doesn't mean being passive or allowing ourselves to be mistreated. Bankai kept clear boundaries and didn't give in to the priest's demands for a debate. Instead, he redirected the energy of the meeting towards something more helpful. He changed a potential power struggle into a teaching moment. The Buddha taught, "Hatred is never calmed by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred calmed. This is a law eternal." This rule applies not just to obvious hatred, but to all forms of resistance and conflict. When we meet resistance with resistance, we simply create more tension. When we meet resistance with understanding, we create space for change. Tonight, as you consider the relationships and situations in your life where you feel the need to push your will or defend your position, can you remember the gentle master who never commanded obedience yet received complete cooperation? Can you find ways to invite others' natural wisdom rather than trying to overpower their resistance? As the Buddha observed, in separateness lies the world's greatest misery. In compassion lies the world's true strength. True authority comes not from the power to make others obey, but from the wisdom to help them discover their own desire to cooperate in creating something beautiful together. Now let us turn to a tale about the difference between wisdom and words that try to hold it. This is the story of the pointing finger. In a peaceful valley monastery, where evening mist gathered among old pines, a beloved Zen teacher enjoyed his daily habit of walking with his faithful dog. The animal's joy was contagious, jumping ahead to get sticks and returning with tail wagging, eyes bright with simple happiness. On this particular evening, the teacher invited one of his most promising students to join them. The young man was smart, his mind sharp as a blade, and equally capable of cutting through complex thinking concepts. Yet this very smartness had become a source of suffering. The more he studied Buddhist books, the more contradictions he found. His bright mind seemed to be creating problems rather than clearing them. As they walked along the familiar trail, the student voiced his frustration. "Master, I struggle with contradictions in our teachings. Some texts speak of emptiness, others of Buddha nature. Some emphasize effort, others effortless being. How can these opposite instructions both be true?" The teacher listened with patient attention. He understood that book smarts could become a trap when the mind tried to grasp truth like solving a math problem. Truth required a different kind of knowing altogether. "You must understand," the teacher said gently, "that words are only signs. Never let words or symbols get in the way of truth. Here, I will show you." The teacher called his dog, who came running with eager excitement. The full moon hung low in the darkening sky, its silver light beginning to come out as daylight faded. The teacher pointed directly at the glowing ball and spoke to his pet with the same tone he used for their usual games. "Fetch me the moon," he commanded, his finger pointing clearly toward the sky body. The dog's response was immediate and predictable. His eyes fixed intently on the teacher's stretched finger, following its movement with focused attention he typically saved for thrown sticks. The animal's entire being concentrated on the pointing finger, completely unaware of the moon hanging beautifully above. The teacher turned to his confused student with a knowing smile. "Where is my dog looking?" The student observed the scene with growing awareness. "He is looking at your finger," he replied, beginning to sense the deeper lesson. "Exactly," the teacher confirmed. "Don't be like my dog. Don't confuse the pointing finger with the thing being pointed at. All our Buddhist words are only signs. Every person must fight their way through other people's words to find their own truth." The young student stood in silence, feeling something shift in his understanding. The moon shone overhead, its light touching everything equally, regardless of whether anyone pointed at it. The truth was like that moon, present and shining, independent of any description or study. As the Buddha observed, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but after watching and thinking, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." This teaching addresses the exact confusion that bothered the bright student. Mistaking ideas about truth for truth itself. Here we discover how book understanding, while valuable, can become a wall when we rely on it exclusively. The student's bright mind was capable of analyzing and comparing teachings, but analysis alone cannot deliver the direct experience that spiritual awakening requires. Like the dog fixed on the finger, he had become so focused on examining words and concepts that he missed the reality they tried to show. Why do we become trapped in book understanding? The thinking mind works through division and comparison, understanding by breaking things into categories. But ultimate truth goes beyond these split distinctions. It cannot be captured in ideas any more than the moon can be held in a picture. This creates what Zen calls the great doubt, the frustrating recognition that our usual ways of knowing are not enough for the most important questions. Different teachings use different words to point toward the same unspeakable reality, like multiple fingers pointing at the same moon from different angles. Think about how this pattern shows up in spiritual seeking. We collect teachings like treasures, memorizing quotes from masters, analyzing meditation techniques, comparing different traditions. All of this can be valuable, but becomes problematic when we mistake gathering of spiritual knowledge for spiritual growth itself. Zen teacher D.T. Suzuki said, "The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon." This applies not only to spiritual teachings but to all areas where we confuse the map for the place. In relationships, we can become so focused on analyzing the relationship that we lose touch with the actual experience of loving. In nature, we can become so busy taking pictures that we miss the immediate wonder of simply being present. The moon represents what Zen calls our original nature, the awareness that exists prior to all concepts and categories. This awareness is always present just as the moon exists, whether or not anyone points at it. It doesn't need to be created or achieved, only recognized. This doesn't mean giving up study or book understanding. The teacher himself used words and concepts to convey his lesson. Rather, it means holding our book knowledge lightly, using it as a tool rather than an end goal. Like a ladder that helps us reach a roof, spiritual teachings can be thrown away once they have served their purpose. Tonight, as you encounter the certain complexity of modern life, can you tell the difference between the pointing fingers and what they point toward? When you study spiritual teachings or seek guidance, can you remember that words are merely fingers pointing at the moon of your own built-in wisdom? Buddha's wisdom teaches us, work out your salvation with hard work. The work involves not just understanding teachings intellectually, but moving through them to the reality they show. Our next story reveals the mysterious ways that true effort comes up when we release our ideas about purpose. This takes place in a mountain monastery in ancient China, where two devoted students named Puk and Muk serve their master with steady dedication. The morning sun streams through the monastery windows as the master calls his two students to him. In his weathered hands, he holds a simple wicker basket, its bamboo strips woven in traditional patterns, but clearly designed for carrying dry goods, not liquids. The master's eyes twinkle with what the students will later recognize as gentle fun as he announces their task for the day. "I need water," the master says, extending the basket toward them. "Please go to the river and fetch some water with this wicker basket." Puk and Muk exchange confused looks, but bow respectfully. They have learned not to question their master's instructions, no matter how unusual they might seem. Together, they carry the basket down the winding path to the river, its waters rushing clear and cold from the mountain peaks above. Reaching the riverbank, they walk into the gentle current and dip the basket below the surface. As expected, the water immediately flows through the woven strips, leaving them empty-handed. Undeterred, they try again, this time attempting to move more quickly from river to shore. Still, every drop escapes before they can take even a few steps. For hours, they experiment with different techniques. They try covering the basket with their robes, moving in coordinated patterns, even attempting to carry it together. Each effort ends the same way with empty hands and growing frustration, yet something keeps them trying. Perhaps it is their devotion to their master. Or perhaps it is the puzzle itself that forces them to continue. Finally, as the sun begins its afternoon descent, they return to the monastery with heavy hearts and the same empty basket. "Master," Puk begins hesitantly, "we have tried everything, but the basket simply will not hold water." The master takes the basket from their hands and examines it carefully, running his fingers along the bamboo strips. A smile spreads across his face as he says, "Ah, wonderful. The basket has never been this clean. If I had simply asked you to clean it, you would have given it a quick rinse. But motivated by the challenge of carrying water, you have scrubbed every surface, forced water through every hole, and polished it to perfection." Buddha's wisdom reminds us, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. This tale unveils the deep difference between going through motions and genuine engagement with our tasks. Why do we struggle to bring our full attention to boring activities? Zen teachings show how our ego creates levels of importance, labeling some tasks as worthy of our best effort and others as mere boring work to be completed as quickly as possible. We save our excitement for activities that promise fame, pleasure, or advancement, while treating necessary maintenance work as obstacles to more meaningful goals. Our minds constantly judge whether activities deserve our full presence. Cleaning becomes a chore when we focus solely on having clean spaces. Exercise becomes boring when we think only of fitness goals. Cooking becomes rushed when we view it merely as food preparation. In each case, we rob ourselves of the real joy available in skillful engagement with the task itself. The Buddha taught that right action emerges naturally when we bring wholehearted attention to whatever we are doing. Puk and Mook discovered this principle accidentally. Motivated by their desire to solve the master's puzzle, they went beyond their usual approach to cleaning and brought creativity, persistence, and total engagement to their work. Master Linji taught, "There is nothing special to do. Just be ordinary. Relieve yourself, wash your face, put on your clothes, and eat your food. When tired, sleep." This ordinariness points not to carelessness, but to bringing the same quality of presence to every activity. The sacred isn't found in special practices, but in meeting common tasks with uncommon attention. Consider how your relationship to household chores might change if you approach them as spiritual practice. What if washing dishes became meditation on change? What if organizing your living space became an exercise in mindful attention to detail? What if preparing meals became an offering of food to yourself and others? The deeper pattern here reveals how indirect approaches often bring out our best efforts. When we focus directly on outcomes, we often become self-conscious and tight. When we focus on meeting challenges or serving others, our natural abilities come out more fully. Tonight, as you encounter tasks that your mind judges as unimportant, can you experiment with bringing the attention you would give to something precious? Perhaps you will discover that the quality of presence you bring to any activity determines its capacity to feed your spirit. As the Buddha said, "If you want to know your past life, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." Every boring task is an opportunity to practice the presence that shapes both your character and your experience of aliveness. Let us continue our journey with a story about keeping inner balance regardless of outside circumstances. This is the teaching of Master Hakuin and the power of "Is that so?" Master Hakuin lived in a small village where he was deeply respected for his wisdom, kindness, and good character. For decades, he had maintained a reputation as a pure and enlightened teacher, someone who had risen above ordinary human weaknesses and showed the highest spiritual ideals. Villagers often brought their problems to him, seeking guidance and inspiration from his teachings and his perfect way of life. In this same village lived a beautiful young woman whose family was well known and respected. When she became pregnant outside of marriage, her condition caused a shock that rippled through the close community. Her parents were furious and demanded to know who was responsible for bringing such shame upon their family. At first, the young woman refused to reveal the father's identity. She was protecting someone she loved, someone whose reputation and future would be destroyed if the truth came out. But as her parents' anger grew and the pressure became too much, she made a desperate decision. In a moment of panic and confusion, she pointed to the one person she thought could weather this storm better than her actual lover, the respected Master Hakuin. When her angry parents faced the Zen master with their daughter's claim, they expected claims of innocence, explanations, or at least some expression of shock at being falsely accused. Instead, Hakuin listened calmly to their angry words and simply replied, "Is that so?" His response only seemed to confirm their worst suspicions. Surely, an innocent man would defend himself more strongly. The scandal exploded throughout the village. People who had looked up to Hakuin as a saint now whispered that he was a fake who had been living a lie. His reputation was destroyed overnight, and former students left him in disgust and disappointment. When the child was born, the parents brought the baby directly to Hakuin. "This is your responsibility now," they declared bitterly. "Since you are the father, you must take care of this child." They thrust the baby into his arms and walked away, leaving him to face the consequences of a crime he had never committed. Again, Hakuin simply said, "Is that so?" and accepted the baby without protest or explanation. For many months, the former master cared for the child with tender attention. He fed the baby, changed diapers, walked the floors during sleepless nights, and provided all the love and care that any devoted parent would give. Neighbors who had once brought him gifts of food and respect now ignored him or spoke of him with hate. He had lost his position, his reputation, and his job, but he continued to care for the child with peaceful dedication. Meanwhile, the young woman struggled with the weight of her lie. Watching the respected teacher suffer for her lie while caring lovingly for a child that wasn't his became too much. The guilt ate her until she could no longer live with what she had done. Finally, she confessed the truth to her parents. The real father was a young man in the village whom she had been trying to protect. Her parents were horrified to learn what they had done to an innocent man. They rushed to Hakuin's simple home with huge apologies. "Master, we have wronged you terribly," they said, bowing deeply. "Our daughter has confessed that you are not the father. We know now that you have suffered unfairly for our mistake. Please forgive us and allow us to take the child back to its real family." Hakuin listened to their apologies with the same calmness he had shown to their accusations. As he gently placed the baby in their arms, he offered the same response he had given throughout the entire trouble. "Is that so?" As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What comes from this story is the deep power of keeping inner balance regardless of how others see us or what circumstances life presents. Why do we allow external events and other people's opinions to determine our inner state? Zen Buddhism teaches that true freedom comes from developing an unshakable center that remains steady whether we are being praised or blamed, honored or dishonored, treated fairly or unfairly. Hakuin's response is that so represents a deep spiritual practice. He wasn't being uncaring or passive. He was showing the ultimate letting go to reputation, status, and even justice itself. His consistent response showed that his sense of worth and purpose came from within rather than from outside approval. Consider how differently most of us would react to false accusations, public embarrassment, and complete loss of reputation. The natural human response is to defend ourselves, to fight against unfairness, to demand that others see the truth. But Hakuin's approach reveals another possibility, meeting all circumstances with the same peaceful acceptance. This doesn't mean we should never defend ourselves, or that we should passively accept all unfairness. Hakuin's teaching is more subtle. He shows us that our inner peace doesn't have to depend on external circumstances being fair or good. We can keep our center regardless of how the world treats us. The Buddha taught, "You will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger." Hakuin's calmness protected him from the additional suffering that would have come from resentment, self-pity, or desperate attempts to restore his reputation. While the situation was undoubtedly challenging, he didn't compound the difficulty with emotional resistance. Look deeply at your own reactions to criticism, misunderstanding, or unfair treatment. How much of your suffering comes from the actual events? And how much comes from your mental and emotional responses to those events? Hakuin's example suggests that we have far more control over the second source of suffering than the first. Tonight, as you encounter whatever judgments, misunderstandings, or unfair treatments life may bring, can you remember Master Hakuin's peaceful, "Is that so?" Can you find the space between what happens to you and how you respond? Discovering that your inner peace need not be held hostage by external circumstances. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. True spiritual growth isn't measured by how well life treats us, but by how gracefully we can meet whatever life brings. Keeping our kindness, dignity, and inner calm, regardless of whether the world recognizes our worth or understands our true nature. Our next story reveals a teaching about the flowing nature of identity and the wisdom that goes beyond normal categories of pure and impure. This is the all-purpose bowl. Master Sengai's living quarters reflected his approach to life, simple, practical, and free from the fancy rules that many people believed necessary for proper spiritual living. Among his few possessions was a single mixing bowl that served multiple functions throughout his daily routine, showing his commitment to simplicity and his freedom from normal social expectations. Each morning after relieving himself, the master would fill this bowl with water and use it to wash his hands thoroughly, ensuring proper cleanliness while keeping his focus on present moment awareness. The bowl served this practical cleaning function with the same dignity it brought to all its uses. Later at lunchtime, Master Sengai would take this same bowl to prepare vegetables that would go with his simple meal of boiled rice. He would wash and cut vegetables in the bowl, mix spices, and use it for all the food preparation that his modest meals required. Finally, he would add the prepared rice to the bowl, changing it into his eating dish for the day's main meal. This pattern continued day after day, season after season. The same bowl served seamlessly as wash basin, food preparation vessel, and rice container, its function shifting fluidly according to the master's immediate needs. To him, this arrangement was perfectly natural and efficient, showing the practical wisdom of not multiplying possessions unnecessarily. However, this unusual approach eventually caught the attention of a guest who was visiting the temple. Watching the master's routine with growing concern, the visitor finally felt compelled to speak up about what seemed like a serious cleanliness problem. "Your Reverence," the guest cautioned carefully, not wanting to offend, but feeling the need to point out what appeared obvious. "Are you sure it is all right to use the same bowl to wash your hands and then serve food? Doesn't this seem dirty? What about the risk of germs?" Master Sengai paused in his meal preparation and looked at his concerned visitor with eyes that held no defensiveness, no annoyance at having his methods questioned. Instead, his response revealed a view that went beyond normal categories of clean and dirty, appropriate and inappropriate. "When I put food into it," the master explained simply, "it is rice bowl world, and when I wash my hands in it is wash bowl world." He paused to let this sink in before continuing with the heart of his teaching. "To you, a wash bowl seems filthy. To me, there is neither pure nor dirty." The guest stood quietly, absorbing the meaning of this response, recognizing that the master had just revealed something deep about the nature of identity, function, and the mental categories we use to organize our experience of reality. The Buddha taught, "All conditioned things are temporary. Work hard." This teaching relates deeply to our understanding of how identity and purpose are fluid rather than fixed, and how our mental categories often create fake distinctions that separate us from direct experience. This ancient wisdom shows our tendency to assign permanent identities to objects, people, and situations based on single functions or temporary traits. We label things as clean or dirty, sacred or common, appropriate or inappropriate, often forgetting that these names exist in our minds rather than as built-in properties of the things themselves. Master Sengai's bowl demonstrates something revolutionary about the nature of identity and function. The physical bowl remained unchanged, whether serving as wash basin or food container. Only its use changed. The master recognized that our mental categories of pure and impure are human ideas that can blind us to the essential nature of things which exists beyond such split thinking. This teaching reveals our attachment to complex systems of grouping and rules that often serve social habit more than practical wisdom. We create fancy rules about which objects can serve which functions, which combinations are acceptable, which boundaries must never be crossed. While some distinctions serve genuine health and safety purposes, many others simply reflect trained thinking rather than necessary reality. Why do we find it so disturbing when someone breaks our expected categories and boundaries? This discomfort often arises from our deep need for predictability and our investment in the mental frameworks we use to organize experience. When someone shows that our categories are more flexible than we assumed, it can threaten our sense of how the world should work. The master's phrase, rice bowl world and wash bowl world, points toward understanding how context decides meaning rather than built-in properties determining function. The same water can be drinking water in one context and cleaning water in another. The same words can be poetry in one setting and talk in another. The same action can be sacred in one moment and ordinary in another. This story also reveals the difference between practical cleaning and mental grouping. Master Sengai wasn't supporting careless cleaning. He washed both the bowl and his hands thoroughly. His point was that our mental names of pure and impure often extend far beyond actual cleanliness into realm of social worry and strict thinking that can separate us from direct practical engagement with life. We can observe similar patterns in many areas where we create unnecessary complications through overgrouping. The person who needs multiple sets of dishes because they can't bear to serve different types of food on the same plates. The office that requires separate equipment for different tasks that could easily be shared. The community that insists on fancy rules for activities that could be handled simply and directly. Zen practice grows what might be called functional flexibility, the ability to work with things according to their immediate use rather than their assigned social categories. This doesn't mean ignoring real practical considerations, but rather questioning which distinctions serve real purposes and which ones simply reflect trained thinking. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that spiritual people should keep higher standards of purity and separation than ordinary folks. Master Sengai's approach suggests that true spiritual understanding might actually move in the opposite direction toward greater fitting in and less fake separation between different aspects of life. The story points us toward understanding that purity and pollution are often mental ideas rather than absolute realities. When we can see beyond these made-up categories to the true nature of things, including our own true nature, we discover a freedom that doesn't depend on maintaining fancy systems of separation and grouping. We also find ourselves faced by questions about what makes appropriate spiritual behavior. The master's unusual approach challenged his guests' assumptions about proper conduct, showing how our expectations about spiritual living can sometimes create unnecessary complexity rather than supporting genuine simplicity and wisdom. Tonight, as you notice the various categories and distinctions you use to organize your experience, can you identify places where these mental ideas might be creating unnecessary separation or complication? What would it mean to hold your groupings more lightly, allowing function and context to decide appropriateness rather than strict ideas? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. When we understand that the categories we assign to experiences exist in our minds, rather than as built-in properties of things themselves, we discover a flexibility and freedom that allows us to work with life more directly and practically, seeing through fake distinctions to the fluid, connected nature of all existence. Tonight, as we draw our time together to a quiet close, can you feel how different your mind is right now compared to when we began? Can you notice the spaciousness that has opened up? The gentle stillness that wasn't there before? This isn't something you have achieved through effort. It is something you have discovered by simply letting go of the struggle to control your thoughts. The Buddha reminded us, the mind is like water. When upset, it becomes difficult to see. When calm, everything becomes clear. As you rest in this moment, notice how this clarity feels. Not empty in a blank way, but empty like a clear sky that can hold any weather without being disturbed by it. Each story tonight has pointed to the same freeing truth, that the mental peace you have been searching for was never actually missing. The frantic thoughts, the endless mental chatter, the overwhelming noise in your head. None of these are your true nature. They are simply weather patterns passing through the vast, open sky of your awareness. Even when tomorrow brings its usual challenges, even when your mind starts racing again, remember what you have experienced here. The ability for this mental quiet isn't something special or rare. It is as natural as breathing. You don't have to earn it or perfect it. You simply have to stop fighting it and allow it to be. Consider how easy this feels right now. Your thoughts may still be present, but they are no longer demanding all your attention. They come and go like gentle waves on a calm lake while you rest peacefully in the depths beneath. This is what the masters meant by an empty mind, not the absence of thoughts, but freedom from being controlled by them. These ancient teachings have shown you something remarkable, that mental freedom doesn't require years of practice or perfect circumstances. It requires only the willingness to stop struggling and recognize the natural stillness that has always been here, patiently waiting beneath the surface noise. The peace you feel right now isn't temporary. It is a glimpse of who you really are when you are not caught up in the endless commentary of thought. May this recognition stay with you, gently guiding you back to stillness whenever life feels overwhelming. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us on this journey.